and we are going to go straight into the next session, but try to create a little bit of a break for you before we have our final session of the day. There are a lot of people crowding around the door, but there are quite a lot of free seats here. So maybe we can take the transition between these two sessions as also an opportunity to shuffle a little. If maybe some of you would be so kind to move in or along, or at least let through the people at the door to find some seats, that would be lovely. I'm just going to introduce you very quickly.
For everything.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to meet you in person, John. So I would just like to briefly introduce to you
30 seconds.
for you. Do you need a break? Go for it while I introduce John.
No, that would be fantastic. No, you're doing a great job.
Okay. I'm so done. It's 3 days now.
It's like open as opposed to closed.
When devoid of content, those that are happy. Thanks very much.
Yeah, that's
by the way, for agreeing to do this on such a short notice.
Were you involved in the organization? I had no idea. Excuse me. Sorry, I just know. I just I've been refusing it now. Yeah, I know that it's incredible.
We said 30 minutes talk, 15 Q&A,
I'm
and
sorry.
then 15 break. And can you moderate the break in afterwards in the sense that it's going to happen something afterwards?
Yeah,
Super. Okay.
I could totally do
So we
that.
agree.
Sorry for the moment of confusion,
worry about
because
it.
in my schedule it didn't. Okay, if I can ask everybody to settle back into their seats, please. I don't want to be stood in the middle of it. Good luck.
Check.
Pronto.
So we have a kind of a friendly fireside chat setting, let's say, prepared for you for the penultimate session of today. I'll let you all back there just finish grabbing your cups of coffee, but I'm going to ask you to kindly come back in or move far away. So as I said, we have two people I'm very happy to welcome for this penultimate session now. As was mentioned on the last panel, John Goetz is one of the most, what did Andrea say, important investigative journalists that we have in Germany here today, who's currently working for the NDR, that's the North German Broadcast Association based here in Berlin, and a moderator of the TV magazine Panorama, who is going to interview Jacob Appelbaum, who is also based here in Berlin, working as a journalist for Der Spiegel and for Tor, and doing many other important things on the topic that we've been discussing here throughout the day. Please welcome both of them.
Thanks everybody for coming. I just wanted to say a couple of organizational things. We're going to talk for 30 minutes, and then we're going to have 15 minutes of questions, and then there'll be a 15-minute coffee break before the last session. The idea was that we would have just kind of a short conversation about the state of things right now and kind of taking a look at where are the weaknesses, where are the strengths of the other side. And the idea of what we just talked about upstairs is that we would, when you play chess, it's very useful sometimes to turn the board around and look at the board from the point of view of the other side. So I'd like to ask Jake to actually for a moment pretend that he's Keith Alexander and to actually see how are things going right now, Mr. Alexander?
Well, it's really hard to put myself into the shoes of someone who's such a fucking asshole. But I'll try to do a good impression here, which is something along the lines of, damn, I wish we understood this internet thing. Mm-hmm. Because I suspect that Keith Alexander is sort of having a lot less sleep these days. And I think that he has a lot of trouble, mostly because he has been caught lying. And he has been caught lying, as has Clapper, as has Holder, as has Obama. So I suspect that he is extremely stressed out about this. And from the sound of it, he doesn't actually know what information may be in the possession of Glenn Greenwald or other journalists. And that probably keeps him up at night more than anything else, because every time he speaks, he knows that he no longer has the argument from authority where he can say something and it's the end of the discussion. Because finally, we have the ability to respond and say, well, you know that time that you said that it wasn't under this program? Well, isn't it under this program, which here are the supporting documents for? And I think that keeps him up at night a bit. And I think also there's some arrogance there, where he doesn't recognize the trade-offs that he's made, and I think he's probably having a bit of stress about that.
I just remember when we did the WikiLeaks stuff when I was at Der Spiegel, and I know now from talking to journalists who are working on this, just did a story this week, and they asked the NSA for a response on their reporting. Their main question, as it was back then with the WikiLeaks stuff, was, what documents do you have? And so the question is that, I mean, what's it like for the NSA not to be able to know what's out there?
I suspect that it shows something, which is an important thing, which is that they're not actually gods. They're not actually completely omnipotent. They actually do have limits, and I think that it's kind of nice to see that, and it's starting to, the facade is starting to crumble a little bit. And so I suspect that that's a really awful experience for them, and I'm so glad that I can return the favor, and that the rest of us can return that favor to them.
Why return the favor?
Well, for example, you mentioned WikiLeaks, and for years, Julian, myself, and a number of other people, some of whom are in this audience, have suffered immense harassment from the U.S. government and from these spy agencies themselves, almost certainly the NSA. And so it's really nice, actually, to be able to give them a little bit of the stress, a little bit of the Sesetzung they gave to us. You know, when they wouldn't give me files on myself or my family or my friends, I had to look into how the systems work for collecting these things so that I could understand what could be in those files. So it's ironic because in a sense they created this situation for a lot of people. And this is a sort of natural reaction to it. So I hope that Keith Alexander is kept up at night a little bit. You know, that some of the other people that are working on this spying, they have to think about the Nuremberg principles a little bit, and maybe something's going to come to light about that. And I really hope that that is on their conscience, not in a terrorizing way, but in a truth is coming, you motherfuckers, and you cannot stop it kind of way.
I mean, what's the thing that he's most worried about? I mean, the one thing is to look at how has the last 6 months gone for him, right? The last 6 months, the NSA has experienced the worst period of it since it was founded as an organization, right? It's been one implosion after another, right? I mean, and so, I mean, how do you see it? And what do you see the thing that they're most worried about in the next 6 months?
I think the thing that most of the extremely guilty criminals in the United States government, the thing they're most afraid of is that the culture of impunity will end, right? When Sensenbrenner, who authored the Patriot Act, I think most of you have heard about this Patriot Act. It applies to you, but you don't get a say in it. But it applies to me, and I also didn't get a say in it, so it's fair. It's equally oppressive to all of us. When the author of that says that Clapper the Director of National Intelligence should be at least fired, if not prosecuted, for lying to Congress, that signals something which is very strong, which is that that impunity may end because the political cast of the United States has to throw somebody under the bus, and it's probably going to be the criminal spies. And so I think that's what makes them the most afraid. It's not a specific program coming out. There are lots of programs that will come out. There's lots of things that will embarrass them. I mean, from the code names themselves to the bumbling implementations or the good implementations that are completely ridiculous, completely overreaching. But it's really the fact that some of them may go to prison before they even get their hands on someone like Edward Snowden. That's what they're most afraid of.
But aren't they also terrified of a second Edward Snowden? I mean, I'm sure that everyone saw there was a piece, I think a few months ago, where they talked about how in the future at the NSA that systems operator or people with access to a great deal of information will only be able to do it with a second person in the room, that they're going to be kind of, you know, have two keys basically. So I mean, isn't he also, and isn't the NSA terrified of the idea also of a second, third, and fourth Edward Snowden?
I guess it depends on how effective Edward Snowden was, right? I mean, you may have only needed one, right? I mean, it's a little bit like a Chernobyl or a Fukushima in a sense to their secrecy, and I think it may be really world-changing in this sense. But I mean, back in the 80s, there was a hacking magazine in Amsterdam run by Rob Gongrip, and part of their slogan was, "Someone you trust is one of us." And the leak is higher up in your organization than you. And I think you see the State Department and the White House turning against the NSA in public. And I can't really think of something even better to embody that phrase than that kind of political warring that's taking place. And so I think they're afraid of both another person who is as courageous as Edward Snowden, but they're also worried about the fact that the people that put them in that position are going to throw them under the bus. And I think that those are equal fears because both of them will be not only career destroying, but actually power destroying. Because as we understand how these systems work, we can legally challenge them. We can have standing in court. We can embarrass them politically. We can build technological and political solutions to them. And so I think that it's evenly split in that case. And both are happening right now. And I'm sure there has to be other people that are as brave as Edward Snowden, but maybe will take a different path. I mean, it seems like a certainty. When you read the Washington Post, you see that there are people from the defense agencies that are speaking with Barton Gellman and other folks where they are not just talking to Edward Snowden or looking at documents. They're talking to people that are still inside that are actually having some courage to speak up because the major illegal crimes are now being exposed, and they're merely providing some background on documents that are already out or something along those lines.
I mean, I think you're really right that there's always been a cyclical thing in the intelligence community in the United States where crimes get exposed and then, as you say, people get thrown under the bus, although it was actually politically allowed in the beginning, and then they do what basically the politicians ask them to do. But there was an interesting point about that I remember Julian made about the kind of Mussolini kind of talk that Obama was doing right after Snowden was in Moscow. He was doing this whole, we're going to get him. There's going to be no limits on what we'll do to get him and all this kind of stuff. And Julian made the point that it sounded like it was rhetoric for the world and for Russia and for newspaper readers, but it was actually rhetoric for the intelligence community. It was actually telling them, we're on your side. And this tension between the two, between the political apparatus that controls things and the intelligence community right now is very interesting. I mean, do you see, is that how you saw that rhetoric? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I did. I take only one issue with what you said, which is that the political apparatus controls the intelligence community. And I want to tell you a funny story. And it involves my favorite country in the world, other than my own home country, which is the People's Republic of San Francisco in California, small country. It's the time that I was in Ottawa in Canada, and someone from the CSE, which is the Canadian version of the NSA, attempted to recruit me. And this has to be the stupidest thing that any intelligence agency could ever do. Not the least of which because I would never join their service, but because then I get to tell this story in public. And so
So what happened?
Well, the thing that was really awful about it is that it gave me a good lead on what is happening now with the BND here, what's happening with the NSA, what's happening with GCHQ. The CSE person said to me, hey kid, you clearly care about these things, you want to change the world, and I was thinking like, great, where is this going? He says, well, why don't you consider how the world actually works? And I said, gosh, I just don't know anything about how the world works. Could you please tell me how the world works? And he said, well, how do you think Prime Minister Stephen Harper, also known as Satan, how do you think that he makes decisions? And I said, well, I guess that you guys put 3 options on his desk, and he gets to choose from any of the 3. And whichever one he chooses is the correct one, right? Because he doesn't have time to research all these things, and he has to trust you, and you have to make these hard decisions, and you're out there protecting the monarchy, and you're really back there in the dark ages, protecting the monarchy. He's like, well, the Queen doesn't have any power. But you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. That's exactly how Stephen Harper makes decisions. Don't you want to be a part of that, kid? And I said, well, no, actually, I don't.
Where was this? Where did this happen? Was it a cafe?
Working with the Tor project is a very strange job, right? Because I get paid basically to write free software and to talk to people about anonymity. So I was invited to speak to a military college in Ottawa. But I didn't know that it was a military college because they sort of tricked me, so I returned the favor. But they sort of tricked me, and they invited me to speak at a local bar to students. So it was a CIA guy, an FBI guy, a CSE guy, a bunch of people from the military, the Air Force and the Navy, an academic, and me with a strong drink in this bar. And this was a recruiting effort after I had given the talk. And I was with someone who is a little bit younger and doesn't understand anything about imperialism. And he was saying, Jake, this is a great job. We should clearly take it. And I said, well, the country you're from is kind of fucked up because of these guys. Maybe we should say no and get out of here with our lives. Seems like a way better deal than being involved with them. And they really pushed and they really pushed. And, I asked them to consider the fact that this vanguardist approach to controlling a democratic government is, one, not going to work for long. And with secrecy being removed, it's going to fail very badly. But also, it fundamentally undermines everything that is good about what we would consider to be a democratic society. But it really prepared me for the fact that this is how almost all political consideration and control of intelligence services really works, which is that Obama or Merkel, they look at their options in front of them, and they choose from their trusted advisors, and that's all there is to it. So, for example, Merkel ordered the BND, the BKA, and the Verfassungsschutz to understand about NSA surveillance. Everybody remembers she wanted to know something about everyone here being spied on, and it was myself and other people at Spiegel that brought forth the information that Merkel had been spied on since 2002. So an American living in some kind of self-imposed exile in Berlin brought forth information that her own Secret Service couldn't bring forward. I mean, to me, if I were a German, I would be pretty mad about that. But also, if I were Merkel, I would sort of wonder where the power really was and where the real control is and where the actual autonomy and sovereignty of the nation is. And so that's what I experienced with the CSE people. And the best part about that story is that I said, I'm really a patriot, but not in the demeaning sense of the word. I'm really, I really am proud to be really hard to have my passport stripped from me because I only have one. That's a problem. It's illegal for a state to make you stateless. So if you have 2 passports, they can always take one away without due process, but they can't take your only one away, as is the case for the Somalis that live in the United Kingdom that maybe get drone struck by the British. So really don't want to take this job. And they said, don't worry, man. The NSA signs off on all our hires. They won't let us hire you unless it's totally fine that you come work for us. And I said, wow, well, now I really know that I can't say yes, so I'm going to go now. And it was really awkward, and I hope that that you don't kill me. And it's been a pleasure. And I know you can't say no to this kind of job, so I'd like another drink. I'm just going to go back over to the bar. It's been fantastic, eh?
But you mentioned earlier that the last 6 months has been like a Chernobyl for them, right? In the sense that it's unending what has been coming out. I mean, even there was a great story today in the New York Times And you also mentioned their terror and fear of getting thrown under the bus, right? Of being called to accountability. What strategic openings do we see through what's happening now? I mean, there was just one thing I just wanted to mention. There was a historical example. In the late 60s, the Yippies went to the New York Stock Exchange. We talked about this the other night. And at the time, the New York Stock Exchange didn't have a glass panel in front. You could go to a mezzanine and look down below at the thousands of traders or hundreds of traders down on the floor. And Abbie Hoffman did this thing where he got wads of single-dollar bills and lined them with every 20th bill or whatever. It was a $20 bill, and then there was an occasional $100 bill and a $1,000 bill. And they threw the money down on the floor, and it caused an incredible riot. And the stock exchange was closed down that day. It couldn't function because everyone was trying to get these single-dollar bills. And there's there's an MIT professor that's come up with an idea, and maybe this doesn't work. I don't know the exact technical side of it. He created a narrative email system for Google Mail, where basically every catchword that the NSA is interested in shows up in this story, and the idea is that people send it back and forth to each other in Massenaft, back and forth. And so I'm just wondering, in terms of ideas that you have, I mean, in terms of what were the weaknesses that we're seeing now, what strategic ideas can we learn from this?
Well, I don't think that we're going to outdo Abbie Hoffman. I mean, totally, that's such an incredible prank. I think that we have a couple of problems, and one of them is that the way the surveillance works is not the way that people commonly understand it to work. And I don't think that adding yourself to a set of people to be surveilled solves the problem of you receiving less surveillance, nor does it solve the problem of their surveillance being effective. I actually think that when they have more data and they can run more analysis, they will not only improve their algorithms, but they'll have more harm to innocent people. So I really think this idea that we should try to jam their systems, it's cute, but I suspect that since we can't easily close the feedback loop to know how well it's working, we may end up causing a lot of harm for innocent people. And a much better thing would be, at least if that might exist, that we should consider working on systems where we actually do help people in a mutual aid solidarity sort of sense. So for example, running a Tor relay definitely gets a little bit of extra monitoring from the U.S.A, but it benefits all the journalists in the room, all the document leakers in the room, and it adds a lot of noise to the system where they can't even begin to do analysis on it unless they can break the cryptography, which, as far as we understand from the leaked documents from Snowden, they can't. So I think that's much more effective and more practical, and it helps to do something else, which is moving from protest to resistance to building an alternative. And that's what we really should be focusing on. And to give you an idea of this, here's something which is not published. I've seen some of the DPI rules for the crazy sensors for the surveillance machines for the Turmoil network. And they label, oh man, I'm really going to tell you this. All right. So, yeah, so deep packet inspection is where you use the internet and there's a machine somewhere and it goes through everything that's flowing through the internet. So if you've ever browsed a web page, it would have seen all the content of the web page. So you go to Facebook and you view a Facebook page, or you go to, let's say, a very popular Linux website and you read about free software. I've seen a DPI rule where they flag anyone that goes to a very particular Linux website. And they label, the comment for the DPI rule says that it is an extremist forum. Okay, there are a lot of people that visit this particular website. And that means that when you think about the signal to noise ratio, you're not really jamming the system because the system automates all of the things you could jam easily, right? The human traders on the floor for Hoffman's prank, that's something totally different than, for example,
clogging.
Yeah, exactly. Actually clogging these machines, because the machines, they're designed to take the line rate of everything going through and to grab as much of it as possible, and to store it and to sort it and to analyze it. And it will only take them a short amount of time to recognize the pattern in this guy's clogging, to tag you as a troublemaker attempting to fuck with them, and then to mark that in your file as well. And so what would be much more effective would be to do what happened, I think it was Newt Gingrich in the 80s or the 90s. None of you should know him. He's an unremarkable person. But
Indeed.
But one interesting thing happened with him, which is that I believe it was him where his cell phone was monitored, and it was not yet a crime to wiretap cell phones. And so because of these conversations being leaked out, and I'm pretty sure that it was him, basically a law was passed that made it not that the phone should be secure, but that it should be a crime to monitor the insecure phones. And of course there is an exception for law enforcement. I think that one thing that would be interesting here would be some kind of civil disobedience or culture jamming that exploits the vulnerabilities that are left into these devices on purpose. And it's the unfortunate thing is that it's extremely illegal, in the sense that if you mess around with some of these systems, you can really do a lot of harm. Like, you don't want to disrupt emergency services. But on the other hand, it's very clearly the case that the thing that changed the debate in Germany and the United States was not that every single person here was spied on by the NSA. It was that Merkel was spied on. And that's what mattered to Dianne Feinstein, and that's what mattered to Merkel. And it was a surprise to both of them because these secret agencies are so out of control. So the question is, who in your community would matter, and show that they're vulnerable, and maybe produce some transcripts, if you can somehow find a way to do that, maybe by talking to them so that it is legal. And I think that would be a much more effective strategy for change, as well as showing them an alternative where they're no longer vulnerable to that. So they have some agency. Because it seems very strange to me that we're not actually fixing the problem in some cases. Or when we do have a fix for the problem, people aren't pushing for it because they think it doesn't apply to them, or something else. Like Germany has to recognize the same thing that I told to some Ecuadorian people recently, which is there are two games you can play. Game number one is that you buy the lie that the NSA wants you to buy, which is that everybody spies all the time, and this is something that's always happened, so it's no big deal. So you should spy too. So leave your systems vulnerable, and then you can spy on your citizens, and everything will be fine. But the problem with this is that when you choose that, the game is rigged. The NSA has better analysis, they have more data storage, they have all sorts of things that even the German government doesn't have. So the second thing is the choice that you actually secure the systems. And you actually try to end the spying. And to do that, you have to give up the vulnerabilities in the systems where the BKA gets to easily wiretap everyone in this room. Right? We have to move from a position where it was possible to do that in secret. Maybe they still can wiretap you, but your phone notifies you that you're being spied on. I don't know what the exact solution is, but I know that the first choice is almost always the wrong one. So data retention, every time Germany has more data retention, the NSA gets more of the German data, right? Every single time that Germany allows someone to wiretap your phone or for Merkel to have a cell phone, same problem, right? I think actually even Obama has this problem because he has children and they, I'm pretty sure, have cell phones and their friends have phones. And if they ride in Air Force One and Obama has a secure phone, he's actually only as secure as all the phones in the airplane, or any one of the phones in the airplane to be specific. And so this transitive risk thing, the only people it benefits are the NSA and spy agencies like them who are outside of the rule of law. And for everybody else, it's the wrong economic choice, the wrong social choice, the wrong choice for due process. And I think the right solution is not just to mock them, but is actually to build alternatives that force them to be open, transparent, and honest so that we can have some accountability.
Great. We wanted to now get questions from the audience for the next 15 minutes. Go right ahead.
So I just wanted to go back to the initial question of how may General Alexander feel these days. So was this really Chernobyl maybe for him? And I'm thinking maybe, so I think to believe that is that they really have a sense they're doing something wrong. So if you presume they think they're doing a good thing to people and democracy and whatever, all the leaks may actually boost their egos and say like, okay, I was never able to tell you, but like I'm the big guy able to basically control the whole world.
Yeah, that's why he's nicknamed Emperor Alexander, for example. I think he probably will be proud of some of these things, just the same way that, you know, there are lots of people that are proud of creating weapons, right? I mean, I think, though, that there's still a loss of sleep. I mean, look at the photographs over time of General Alexander, and he does not look like he's getting a lot of sleep. So he may have he may be the biggest man in the room by all accounts in every way that you might measure that. It doesn't look like it's doing him a lot of good, I think. But I have a friend, Jennifer Granick, she was a lawyer at the EFF and actually was my lawyer at the EFF for a time. And she had dinner with him, and she described exactly what you're saying, which is that he was really proud of it, and he sort of mocked her, and he was really rude to her, and he used a BlackBerry, and it was, like a regular one. And so he definitely felt like he had this impunity, and he felt like he was really proud, and he felt that Snowden was clearly a traitor, and he wasn't ashamed of the fact that Mike Rogers, I think it was, had joked about drone striking Snowden or putting him on a kill list.
It was Hayden.
Was it Hayden? Yeah. I thought Mike Rogers said, "I can help you with that."
I know that Hayden also made a joke like that.
Yeah. Those guys are scumbags, and I know they don't think that about themselves. But I think that it's important to note that it still has an impact on them, right? Because it's not just about how they feel about themselves. It's the fact that when they go home for Thanksgiving, which is an American holiday where we celebrate genocide, it's the case that people give them a hard time, and they even have talking points that get leaked to the media to subvert their ability to lie to their families, which I think is great. So, they are bothered to some extent, and I hope that it gets worse for them.
Okay, we have a question over here.
You said about the suggestion of the prank of using special words to give the NSA a lot of traffic is a bad idea because you would get on a watch list or whatsoever. But isn't using encryption also getting you on the watch list? And let's be honest, you can't encrypt all your communication right now. For example, I can't teach my parents to use PGP or something like that. So I would be on a watch list because I'm using encryption.
So the thing that you have to understand about the surveillance is as follows. There exists an entire planetary surveillance network where any electronic communication that the NSA can get their hands on, they analyze in some way. So that's the first part. That's bad news because all of the electronic communication systems that we have pretty much fall under that. The second thing to understand is that basically all the things that you do are going to potentially flag in some way or be stored in some way. So for the metadata itself, it's going to be stored for as long as is possible anyway, no matter what you do inside of that. And the third thing to understand is that if the outside layer is something that's encrypted, I think that it's much better than if it's exactly the same thing that you would have done where it wouldn't be encrypted at all, and that is the keyword that would flag you. So for example, I think it's better to use something like Tor in Iran, so you blend in with all the Tor users, than it is to use, for example, a gay dating website directly in Iran. Because when they go looking for people using gay dating websites, they're going to get you immediately. There's no effort for them. And it is the case that if you do use some kinds of communication, you might come up in the analyst's search, right? So they search for all PGP messages in a given country. Or in one slide they said all VPN messages, all VPN traffic, and then the next slide's like, now decrypt it all. By the way, what? That's amazing. That suggests to me, though, that the first step is that they would have to do a lot of extra work. And so I think it's much better to raise their cost than it is to not raise their cost, essentially. And I think if you flag yourself by, for example, being an NSA troublemaker, then the way that I mean, look at what the United Kingdom is doing right now to David Miranda and the way that they're treating Sarah Harrison. I mean, they are talking about terrorism as if Sarah Harrison or as if David Miranda are the equivalent of someone with a dirty bomb or atomic weapons of some kind or biological weapons. So I don't think that you want to willingly be in that set of people. I also don't think that set of people should exist as a legal definition under terrorism. But I really think the thing is that you want to help to improve the encryption. You want to help improve the availability of encrypted services in places. And if we want to really fuck with the NSA in an effective way, don't do it with keywords that they're going to maybe tag you over. Do it with crypto that's going to cost them compute time and that's going to actually improve your privacy and the privacy of other people.
There's another question.
Could you please elaborate on that other idea you just mentioned to fight back with like public actions? You said like transcribing dialogues you had with famous people or people in your area. You said something like that. I didn't quite understand what you meant.
Well, I just meant that if you want to engage in civil disobedience, I mean, it's up to you. It depends on the size of the nouns. If you it's not hard to intercept GSM. And I would never advocate that you do something that is illegal, but I would advocate that you consider the fact that maybe it's the case that in some cases it's not even encrypted, these GSM signals, for example. And you know, nothing motivates a person like personal involvement, right? If you could show the transcript text messages, which we know to be insecure, of a head of state, to the head of state, if you could work with the head of state, that's probably your best bet. But if you could really demonstrate that, those people will personally be on your side because they don't ever fall for this stupid rhetoric of having nothing to hide. They know they have something to hide. They know that as soon as they are outed as being gay in a country where it's only okay to be a straight Catholic, for example, that's going to destroy their career. They understand that very well. And in some cases, these people have a lot of power. So try to find those kinds of things where you can change the power dynamic and get those people to be personally involved and to personally care about it.
Here we go, another one.
You mentioned accountability of secret services, that you would like to see more of it. Me too, of course. But so thinking theoretically that we can get it, what type of information would we as citizens need to have in order to really keep them accountable? Like what details should it be and what categories of data about how they work would be necessary for us? That's one thing. And then back to real politics, what makes you believe that this is feasible at all? Like thinking of the mechanisms we have in all the countries, even the ones mentioned before in Germany, do you see any hope in any political system where accountability works?
So, sure. I'll answer your second question first. You're familiar with water. You drink it all the time. And it's the case that there are health standards, there are environmental standards about water. And that's enshrined in law. It's very important that that's enshrined in law in societies that are based on the rule of law, like yours, not really like mine, for example. And it is the case that you need technical details enshrined in that law as well. And I think the best way to control the secret services is to ensure that they can't cheat. Because basically you can't ensure it, right? So if you want to be sure they're not tapping your phone call, what you need to do is make it completely impossible for them to do something useful with that tapped phone call. So encrypting it. And to have secure handsets. That's something which would be very important for actually controlling them. And then the other thing to do to control them is to have budget controls. And then the final thing is to do what the Belgians have done, which is to have an oversight agency that has full access to all of their systems, to interview all their personnel, and can encourage whistleblowing in a non-adversarial manner, but it's still kind of adversarial. That is, they are not adversarial against this agency as they would be against a Snowden or against, let's say, a Senate or a parliament of some kind. And I think those things are the only ways to have a control, but also to make it so that the, let's say, assassinations are still illegal. To bring agencies within the rule of law. If they do something that is legitimate, to break that off from secret agencies and to have public agencies take care of those tasks, the tasks that we think are important. And yeah, I mean, I think that might work. And yeah, maybe. I don't know. The other thing is that, this is very unpopular, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think that, yeah, maybe I'm not going to say that actually.
Just a quick note on oversight. There's going to be, or at least it's been discussed widely, that there'll be a parliamentary investigation in Germany into the NSA stuff. And one of the strategies that people are worried about in the Bundestag right now is that the socialists, the SPD, basically has come out with this proposal to increase oversight of the intelligence services, and the strategy that many are worried about, that they're using that to actually get out of the agreement to do an NSA parliamentary investigation. Just so people should know that. Yeah.
I think increasing the social cost is actually another thing. So in the United States, in the hacker culture, especially if you go to something like DEF CON, you meet people that work for defense contractors, and you meet people that are in the military, and you know, they're in some ways kind of cool or sexy because they work with like flying robots, or they have immense amounts of power, because power is very much a worshipped quantity and quality, you know, in the US in some circles, but not in all. And I think raising the social cost of being a spy, of being someone who spies on people, is a very important thing. And I think that's one of the main things we can do. But there's a problem, which is that it is illegal. If one of the people in this audience was an NSA agent, it would be a crime for me to reveal that to you. And this is because of a whole bunch of nonsense in the United States, approximately 30-something years ago, where basically a station chief in Greece had been killed, and they blamed it on some transparency people that ironically called themselves the Fifth Estate, of all things. And I think what we need to do is make sure that these people are not special, that there are not two laws. And so why is it that they are not allowed to be known? Why is it that we are not allowed to know that one of our neighbors is essentially there to spy on us? Why do they get special protection? Because they are in service of the state, which in theory is our state. And I think if we can somehow solve that problem, maybe through document leaking, I don't know, but probably through legislative change, that would be very powerful. So that way the social cost can be balanced out a little bit, and they don't have a trump card to put any single person in prison for merely talking about or trying to have an individual relationship with one of these people.
Okay, one last question.
Yep.
My question is, where should the authority of cryptology lie? Should governments have an authority of cryptology? I was recently confronted by someone from the establishment who said, you know, look at World War II, and if the Allied powers wouldn't have had their cryptology competence, you know, what would have happened with the war? And I hate that argument, but I still find it a difficult argument to counter. So I would really be interested to have your thoughts on that.
Okay, second question.
Did you just Godwin's law the entire discussion?
Sorry, just kind of re-asking a question I asked earlier, which is about user experience. Obviously, you are involved in creating a product which you want as many people to use as possible, or project rather than product. But it benefits from more nodes. There was this thing recently, Safe Plug. Somebody tried to basically kind of productize Tor in a box. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm also working on a little project that's like this, and I've been for actually several years. It's this sort of skunk works project, which is not funded, called the Tor Router. And the Safe Plug people, I think, are making, you know, a product, and it's kind of interesting, but it doesn't look like a very good free software project. You can't really audit it. They haven't sent us one. They didn't contact us beforehand. I think it's very important that security stuff is usable, but I actually think that the right answer is that the law should force. So, for example, this proposal for legislation here from Carlos and from some other people about you broke the internet, I think that what we should do is make it so that crypto is a required thing, and that there is a sort of toxic side effect if you build technology that can be surveilled. And I think we should probably tax the hell out of things that are unencrypted, because they basically create a data Valdez, which is in the control of other intelligence services, literally in the case of Germany. And we should not do that for crypto. So in Ecuador, there's a big movement right now to make it so that free software people get tax credits, because they're writing things for the commons, and that they should tax proprietary software, which creates a long-term burden that is not yet well understood, and that actually creates dependency on foreign companies and may have backdoors and other unintended consequences. And so I think we should not just make it usable, but we should actually make it so that all the things that are out there are secure, and then you can choose between the things you like, and you don't have to worry about this other stuff. And it should be peer-reviewed, and it should be free software, at least at one reference implementation. And that's important. And what Carlos was working on, even though he's an extremely crazy guy in all the right ways, you should talk to him about this. And I think this is important, because it basically is trying to solve this problem from not just the legal side, but also the technical side, which I think is often proposed as a false dichotomy between legal and technical, and it's not the case. And the problem with the Second World War and crypto, I mean, this is like such a fucked question. I mean, it's a depressing question to close on, especially, but I mean, wow, it's so hard. But I mean, the crypto advantage that existed with cryptographers in the Second World War was important for winning the Second World War. And I think actually it's a good thing that they broke those crypto systems. But we're not dealing with the same setup. We're not dealing with a world war between one genocidal regime, for example, that's imperialist and invading a bunch of countries, and, for example, I don't know, whatever you want to call either side. I mean, we can characterize it in different ways. If you ask someone from Dresden, for example, they'll have a very different answer. And I think we shouldn't engage people about that to the degree that they would like us to, because it's a totally loaded argument. It's like saying, you know, when are you going to stop beating your wife? It's an impossible thing for a very specific moment in history where if we really look at it, these guys are criminals. They have broken all these laws. They have gone outside of the democratic process. Whereas we decided, for example, in the United States, to go to war because of acts of war, and we had democratic acts that backed that up, that made us take certain steps, and they made certain extreme situations which are supposed to be temporary and extremely temporary for only this situation. And what these guys are basically doing is saying that, you see, it gave us this advantage in this extreme situation, let's make that the new normal. And there's an unintended cost to that and an unintended consequence for that, which is very, very scary. And yeah, I feel like we have not yet fully explored, for example, the economic costs of making these trade-offs. Like, I have a very close friend who runs a very large company, and whenever he travels abroad, because the FBI wants to wiretap my cell phone, his cell phone is also insecure. And his company and the economy of the United States actually has a big stake in his company, and it's at risk because they wish to make that trade-off. And that trade-off was made in the dark. That trade-off was made in secret, and we have not examined the economic or the social costs of doing that. So if we talk about just the enigma, obviously it's the case that there are some really awful things where sometimes a certain advantage, certain kind of secrecy is beneficial. I would never say otherwise. But I don't think that we should really try to say, for example, that all of these guys criminally spying on us is like some noble thing, like cracking the enigma to stop a genocidal regime. It just seems preposterous to me. And I also think that if they hadn't broken the crypto, the fact of the matter is that we had atomic weapons and we used them against people. And that actually provided, and we're the only country to ever use atomic weapons against a human population. So the fact of the matter is, if we hadn't had crypto, we still would have resulted in using brute force. We did use that brute force, and we would have probably decimated even more of humanity with those atomic weapons. So maybe there's a trade-off to be made there where we should decide between those things, but maybe we shouldn't think that every moment in history is so extreme. And maybe by having end-to-end cryptography, we can avoid those situations from occurring again in the future, from giving more people more power over us, and instead returning to us our individual liberties, which will, instead of creating more totalitarianism, will create more libertarianism. So hope that answers your question, and good luck with this. Next time also maybe just tell them adults are speaking.
Okay, thanks everybody. There's a 15-minute break now.